Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Drawk Show. I am thrilled today because I get to talk about an RPG that I somehow haven't covered yet, despite the fact that I love it. We are here with the Maple Table. Do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Hello, I'm the Maple Table. My real name is Nathaniel, but that's much less interesting.
It's also, I think, you're either the second or third Nate so far.
No, never Nate.
Never Nate, only Nathaniel.
Never Nate. Nathaniel or Maple, sometimes late for dinner.
Nathaniel is Nate with class.
I knew another Nathaniel in school, actually, and he didn't mind going by Nate, but that was instilled into me when I was quite young because my mom raged on anyone who called me Nate. She said, I did not call them, no, I did not name him Nate. I did not name him Nat. His name is Nathaniel. And so I picked that up from my mom.
Oh, that's wild. I've never heard of like an enforced lack of nickname before. Okay, so we have Nathaniel, Maple Table. Do you want to tell people what kind of content you make?
So I do lore videos around Starfinder. I've started integrating some more of the Pathfinder 2E kind of lore videos into my channel and broad spectrum coverage of the world of darkness. So uh, I started with Werewolf the Apocalypse. I have covered my second biggest one is Vampire the Masquerade. And there's just so much in the world of darkness to cover. I don't feel like I'm going to get through all of it, but that's what I do.
Hmm. Oh, it's a huge, brilliant system. I was just talking to Sleepy Jack about it on stream about how like there's also a weird void of good lore YouTubers for World of Darkness, despite how sprawling it is.
There's I've managed to make a couple of connections in there. So another one that I'm a fan of is Apollo Speaks. He's relatively
Mm,
new channel actually.
okay, I hadn't heard of that one, which explains it if they're new.
Within within about the last 6 months, maybe a year.
Nice. Okay. I've noticed like the vast majority of lore content for World of Darkness tends to circle around vampire.
That is absolutely the most popular franchise in the World of Darkness
Makes sense.
series. I would say werewolf, maybe mage, kind of second, and then there's quite a few niche games within it, like Mummy. I can't. What do they call it? Just Mummy. And then there's Demon the Fallen, that's Old World of Darkness, and Demon the Descent, which is New World of Darkness. That's kind of when Onyx Path picked it up in like 2014.
Okay. The difference between new and old World of Darkness, how much the lore kind of slides together. I mean, you just did a video about that, right?
I did just do a video about that. Shameless self plug.
Well, it is something that's very interesting about the franchise is that weird brief split where it became a different thing and how, from what I understand, some of the things that were introduced in New World of Darkness when they went back came back with it, which confuses people even more.
Yeah, so some things came back, some things were kind of the same but a little different. So, you know, it I found it confusing and it's tripped me up several times. It'll probably continue to trip me up in the future even though I do my best not to. Because there are some people out there who take their editions and knowing which, what bits of lore came from where very seriously, and I try not to take myself too seriously.
It's an approach I love. I always prefer casual lore creators who treat it as a game first and come at it with that attitude where there's a little bit more leniency and fun. I find the hyper seriousness ruins a lot of the joy for me. So a place I like to start with people who make RPG content or who play a lot of RPGs is what got you into tabletop role playing games.
What got me into games? I have to thank my friends for that because, again, it wasn't one of those things I was allowed to do when you're a kid growing up and
Mm,
kind of. I wasn't growing up in the Satanic Panic, but it was still very prevalent in, uh, minds of parents and things like that. So you just didn't. But, once you turn 18, you move out on your own, you make some friends and they say, "Hey, you want to play Werewolf the Apocalypse?" And you say, "Sure."
so Werewolf was your introduction.
Yeah, Werewolf was my introduction to World of Darkness. We did a campaign with some friends of mine that I still game with today, and they that's kind of where they started me off at 15 years ago, and our campaign was a year long for that one.
Interesting. Okay. I, most of the people I'll talk to, like I think the vast majority of people's introduction to RPGs is Dungeons and Dragons. So I'm always very curious when people have a very different introduction. How do you think that kind of framed how you saw tabletop RPGs?
Well, you always love your first. I mean, I did play a little bit, like a game here or a game there, of when you sneak out to your friend's house for Dungeons and Dragons. But the first one that I actually got committed to was Werewolf the Apocalypse.
Hmm. Oh, and that's very different than like one off, two off. I guess because it kind of, well, it might not be your introduction to the medium, it's your introduction to like what people talk about when they talk about the medium, like what most of the experiences are. Uh, so,
Yeah, I guess the part of what sold it for me was, playing a raging werewolf. But the other thing that I enjoyed about World of Darkness was the interconnectedness of the games, at least from the old World of Darkness perspective. Um, the people tell me that the new games you can do it just as easily, but I don't know. I haven't played too many of the new games yet.
mhm.
But it was Vampire the Masquerade is its own game, but it takes place in the World of Darkness, which you can play in. You could have a game alongside werewolves. You could have a game alongside mages, demons, wraiths, things like that. It becomes a lot more complicated, but you can do it.
It's such a selling point for me as well. Running a mixed game, I found it so interesting to try to negotiate the lores, and I think it does a really cool thing where it points out that the lore that you're given is often from the perspective of these groups because it feels like the lore you get in one book conflicts with the lore from another, and both believe it to be true, and it really leaves you in a perspective of figuring out the universe.
Exactly. I like that each game is its own perspective.
Hmm.
From um, the perspective of the protagonist. And sometimes things are different. Sometimes it's the same story. It's just told in a different way.
Absolutely. It's such a unique and cool thing. So I'm drawing a character you played from a Starfinder game. How did you find Starfinder? What was your introduction to this beautiful space opera?
So again, the same group of friends that I played Werewolf with said, "Hey, let's this game called Starfinder came out. It's kind of space fantasy themed." And one thing that I've always appreciated about my friends group and gaming group is that we're always open to trying new games, and that's kind of how it's been even from the beginning.
Hmm.
It's like, hey, let's play this one for a while. Okay, let's try this one for a while. Let's move on to this one for a while. And Starfinder came up, and I, again, just immediately fell in love with the system.
It's
So in this particular game, it was kind of a homebrew precursor to the adventure of Against the Aeon Throne.
okay. I'm not a module player, so I know very little about modules. What for the audience out there who aren't familiar with Starfinder is probably helpful because I'm going to ask, what's the Aeon Throne and how did the homebrew prequel go?
So I also haven't played. I don't do a lot of modules. I've done a lot of homebrew, and it seems like whenever we play games, it's a lot of homebrew and
Hmm.
continuing the story. But Against the Aeon Throne is dealing with the Aslanti. They are space human supremacists,
Okay.
and that's kind of their belief. The Aslanti are also big in Pathfinder and the Pathfinder lore, so they have persisted into Starfinder, and without giving too much away, they exist, and that adventure path kind of follows, exploring that space empire.
So it's human supremacists in space, and probably if you're playing as non-human aliens, immediately makes them an antagonist, and hopefully if you're playing a
Yeah,
human, immediately makes them an antagonist if you have good values.
yeah, they don't. The Aslanti aren't fans of anybody non-human in their culture. Non-humans are second-class citizens, although they do exist, but they're little better than servants,
Hmm.
the
Uh,
help.
and what was the prequel then? Was it just kind of more establishing of that sort of situation, or was there a specific plot that the GM came up with?
So the GM came up with his own kind of plot to introduce kind of the empire and be like, hey, there's this big bad empire that's out there that we were just learning about,
Mhm.
and we didn't see it to its conclusion, but we did get our characters up to about level 5, I think,
That's not
from 1 to
bad.
5. So it was a good introduction to the game, and then COVID kind of happened, and
Mm,
the the gaming group kind of stopped a little bit. Um, I ended up moving to the UK, so can't play games when you're in a different country, time zone, 7 hours. It's
yeah,
it's difficult.
makes it a lot harder. I've tried to do online games with people in Europe while in Canada, and it has been difficult to arrange.
It's that 7 hours that's a bit of a killer. Well, it's 7 hours for me. It's 8 for you, I think.
Yeah, over in BC. Yeah, you end up in a situation where it's like either you're asking the person in Europe to stay up till 3 a.m. or you're asking everybody else to be up and ready to play an RPG at like 10 in the morning,
Yeah, pretty much.
which is not when most people want to be gaming.
No, if I had my way, I would be waking up at 10 or 11 in the morning and staying awake till about 2 a.m. at night. That's kind of my
Oh, yeah.
perfect
Oh,
my
I feel
perfect
you
sleep
there.
cycle. But I have children, and that is just not an option.
So let's talk about a bit about the character I'm drawing, who I'm just struggling to get a pose for, but we're going to get it.
So the character that I was kind of asking you to draw is a Pahtra, which is the cat-like race, feline race in Starfinder. Now, this was the character that I played in that same game, whose name was Lilith Pasha, and
Ah,
she was a mystic that had some history with the Vesk. There's a particular planet in the Vesk space that Vesk 6. The
hmm.
planet
Eh,
was originally called Pulanis, home of the Pahtra. It was overtaken by the Vesk,
just real quick,
and
Vesk are the lizard people, right? The militant lizard people?
yes, that's
Okay,
correct.
just
Not
wanted to double check that.
inherently evil, just militant.
Yes. Okay.
But the Vesk are the major, or the Vesk or the Veskarium, their empire is called, is the next major empire next to the Pact Worlds, and they've had canonically they have a very strained peace.
Gotcha. So she's from that region. She's from occupied territory, her people's original homeworld.
Yes, she was part of a resistance that failed, and so she's not very fond of the Vesk, but um, she was always a combat medic and kind of brave.
Nice. Um, so you were describing the character a bit to me, and you said she likes to use heavy weapons, but specifically like traditional kinetic projectiles, right?
So yeah, she likes a big long rifle in
Rifle.
that
Let's
sense.
change it. I thought it was heavy weapon, heavy weapon. Let's
Not
change this. I like
she
changing
was
things.
sorry if I'm
No,
getting
no
you
problem.
erasing everything here. So she was more of like a long rifle, not quite like sniper rifle, but
You know,
I
I'm gonna redo the entire pose. I think we can do that.
space M16, I guess, is kind of
Nice.
what I envision. But definitely a fan of non-laser weapons. More definitely a fan of the kinetic weapons and
Okay.
like chain guns on the starships and things. That was something that she always enjoyed.
Wait, so because you don't go by Nate, magical Nate is not you. So this is another Nathaniel.
So this is another Nathaniel. Well, hello, other Nathaniel in the chat.
I think. Oh, magical Nate. You were someone I talked to, right? I can't remember usernames to between different platforms. But yeah, having a game at 7 a.m. Oh my god, I can't imagine trying to be that alert at 7 a.m. Oh god, that sounds like a hell. Okay, so long rifle, Earth equivalent of M16. Can you talk a bit about a mystic? Because I think a lot of people, I mean, you made a whole video about this. A lot of people don't know about like how magic fits into a world like Starfinder that's so driven by technology and space. And I think it's a setting we don't expect traditional magic in. Like usually, magic
It's
in space is either science coded or mystical, not really codified into spells.
it's one of the things that I've appreciated with Paizo specifically in their approach to things. They kind of they play into all sides of it and they make it canon to the world. So there are some worlds that rely more on, or species maybe, that rely more on their magical influence and less on technology. And then you can also have it the opposite direction where a society leans more into the technology and less on the magic. But
Okay.
it all blends together. You can create a light orb to give you you know, seeing down the hallway, or you could use a flashlight. Using a flashlight is more easily accessible to most people who don't have, magical abilities. But magic and technology coexist, and everybody understands that they do the same thing, but technology is more easy for more people to grasp.
Mm.
And then Paizo, in their adventure hooks and even in some of their supplements, they talk quite a bit about this and say, hey, if you're, building your own society that you want to do it with this, think about these kinds of things. And here's some plot hooks, or here's some suggestions for you in that sense. But magic in Starfinder is fairly, it's uncommon. It's uncommon, but it is around.
It's present in the way that you would expect to be exposed to it, but having magic isn't common.
Not everybody can just do things, but there's lots of magically infused items, for example. So
Okay.
the concept of someone having magic is not neither, fear the mage or don't fear the mage. You fear the mage because you find out that they can throw a big fireball or melt your brain from a distance.
Not because there's an intrinsic danger to magic in this setting or a distrust.
Yes.
Okay. I I like that middle ground. I feel like there's something interesting about Starfinder that I think a lot of people's go-to setting when they imagine magic and space is Warhammer 40K. And the biggest reason, in my opinion, to play Starfinder over a Warhammer game is that magic isn't such an alien and feared and dangerous and strange thing. It really is a way of getting the vibe of D&D magic in space.
Yes. And I think Paizo did a very good job of capturing that and playing to that. And so you can really make it whatever you want. And their system allows you to lean more into the magical or less, however you want. So they encourage you. That's one thing I've always been a fan of with Paizo in this, is that they give you a lot of good adventure hooks, but the encouragement is, here, we've given you some ideas, go make it your own.
Okay. I What think are some of your favorite aspects? Like if you were pitching the game real quick, Argle. Okay, that makes sense. I can't keep username straight platform to platform at all. So, what are some of your favorite aspects of Starfinder as an RPG or a setting that, like, what do you use to kind of pitch it?
What do I use to kind of pitch it? I don't know. It would depend on the person, because if I want them to play it, I want to make sure that I'm pushing their buttons for it. So
Fair enough.
if someone likes that magical element, I'm going to talk about that. If someone likes, the concept of D&D in space, then yeah, we're going to do that. That's kind of what I'll lean to talk about it. There's one, it wasn't my thing, but I appreciate that a lot of people enjoy it, was the tech revolution. And
Mm.
this is where you get to, leaning more into that technology side of things. But part of that was giant battle robots.
Gi- I didn't know they had a giant battle robots.
So not only do you have a giant battle robot, not just power armor, which does exist within Starfinder,
Hmm.
but literally a mech that you can drive. And
Ooh,
furthermore to that, if your party all has individual mechs, there is even rules for combining those
but there's
singular
Voltron
individual
rules.
mechs. Yes, into Voltron.
They got Voltron rules in Starfinder now.
Yes, yes.
I missed that. Oh my god.
Since the tech revolution, Voltron
Okay,
exists in Starfinder.
I need to take something back. There are now two reasons you might pick Starfinder over a Warhammer 40K game because Warhammer 40K does not have Voltron rules.
You could even go full Pacific Rim on that one too. So there is
Oh my
rules
god.
for creating massive creatures, like gigantic creatures that are specifically designed to be fought in these mechs
Oh
or
my
starships.
god. I love that.
So you can clearly see where Paizo's drawn their inspirations from, but it's if I know somebody's into that, we're gonna try that.
Oh, look, I don't care how much it's not your particular thing. I don't think there's anybody who's like, I don't want a game that lets me Voltron my giant robots. If you are that person, if you play RPGs and you say Voltroning a robot sounds dumb, I feel like you have to be lying to yourself in your heart. I
Yeah,
I
there's something to be said. How many can D&D do that? I don't think so.
I truly not. I mean, the D&D excuse is always you could homebrew it, and you could, but I defy that homebrew rules for a Voltron are gonna work well. Oh my god, I love that so much. That's okay. Okay, they've added more than I thought because I was watching one of your videos recently, and I'm like, oh, they brought scaling cantrips in a way similar to PF2, and oh, that's cool. That's really necessary. I didn't know about the Voltron edition.
I thought I'd covered that. Maybe I didn't hit that point
Oh,
home hard enough.
I
I want
just miss
to.
videos and catalogs all the time, so I probably
But
just missed
yeah,
that.
yeah. Why haven't you watched my 100+ videos on Starfinder?
Oh, that's so rad. Oh my goodness. Okay. Uh on that because when I played last, the only power armor that was kind of Gundam-esque was the one that let you fly and attach swords to it. And I was like, I mean, this is cool, but stats wise, it's so much weaker than the other power armors of the same level. It just doesn't feel worthwhile. So I guess I'm not going to have a cool Gundam. It's fine, but full on mech rules are such an improvement. I don't know why this pose is escaping me. I'm gonna get there, but normally we'd be done this section.
Oh,
Uh,
not to worry.
what other stuff have they been adding lately that has been particularly interesting? Because I've been out of the loop on Starfinder, focus on PF2.
So they've been trying to improve starship combat, and it's been quite clunky. But
Mm-hmm.
for those who like it, they really enjoy it. For those that haven't liked it, there really is no middle ground. It's you love it or you hate it. But
I
they've been trying to simplify those rules, and that's what we're seeing actually with the new release coming out later this year with Starfinder Enhanced.
so what exactly is Starfinder Enhanced? Because I've heard a bit about it. Is it like a second edition, or is it just optional rules? What's the exact deal there?
So this is a common thing that I've seen come up, and this is what I'm actually going to be talking about in a upcoming video shortly. But Starfinder Enhanced itself is a reworking of some of the rules. They've retooled some of the classes, rebalanced things a little bit. So it's not Starfinder 2.0. It's just more Starfinder.
Okay. I'm curious to see what that looks like. If there's any part of Starfinder that I felt was hard to get into, it wasn't the ship combat, it was the ship building. And I'm curious how that's has that been addressed at all in changes?
I don't know. If they're going to do it, it's probably happening in the enhanced book that's coming out.
That makes sense. Because
But
I found my group was having to make Excel spreadsheets to be able to figure out our ship budget.
yeah, that was always kind of complicated, that particular one. Once you get into it, like things like Roll20 helped a little bit if you were using Roll20. I didn't try it on any other virtual tabletop. But it was always a little complicated.
That's not so bad, actually. I might actually keep it. No, then people can't see it. Oh, I think there's something so interesting in Starfinder about how it's so much more item focused than most RPGs. Like there's so much modularity and levels to items.
Yeah, the levels, and I think a common misconception with that as well is with when it comes to level items or item levels, some
Mhm.
people assume that unless you're that level, you can't get that item, but it's more or less for the GMs to balance a bit. You know,
Mhm.
it should be this should be for a level 3 character, or at least that's how I've treated it anyways.
Mhm.
If you're level 2 and you find a level 3 gun or buy a level 3 gun because you've saved up your money, sure, you're going to have a little bit more power, but you don't want to be buying a level 2 gun when you're level 15.
Mhm. I like the system, and I like how it really feels like, in a way that I think sci-fi should, that your gear has a real impact on what you do and what you're capable of. It also just has such a fun flavor. Are there any like particular items that stand out to you as favorites in the catalog?
There's there's one that I kind of like. There's a weird one. I'll give you a weird one and then I'll give you one of my favorites. So one of the weird ones is the serum of sex shift.
Yep, that's fun.
So if you want to just do a disguise, you drink this and you can change your gender. You for a temporary time. You could also change your species because there's one of disguise as well. So if you wanted to look like a different creature, then you can use these serums. But probably one of my favorite items is going to be the comparable to the bag of holding. They call it the null space chamber.
Okay.
And
So,
depending on what level you get, depends on how big the null space is. So it's a little different from a bag of holding in the sense that it's not infinite on the inside.
mhm.
But if it's big enough on the inside, you could store a player character in there. You have to be careful because they can run out of air. And they give you rules for sort of calculating that as well.
That's I think they did a similar thing with the PF2 bag of holding where they give you rules for how long you can survive inside. And I have made extensive use of that, but I do love the idea of like, because they're still weight based, like it's weight based, but otherwise it's this floating space. And I think there's something much more fun about the aesthetic if you open something and it's like just bigger than it should be, like it's just a lot of room.
Yeah, like the police box.
Like
It's
the
bigger on
magic
the inside.
police box. Fiction's favorite vehicle. Uh, so you mentioned that you'd run a game as well. What was the story there? What did you choose for a plot line to focus on in Starfinder?
I had been that was a homebrew adventure that I built myself, so I was just running my own story. I'd taken some inspiration from StarCraft and put my players in there along with I always enjoyed exploring the other planes of existence, so I incorporated that elements to that in there as well. Unfortunately, the campaign fell apart. It was a bit of timing issues and near when I was moving, so the game just never came to a conclusion.
Mm. Was there any like specific hooks, anything you were really looking forward to in that one?
I was really looking forward to if my play. I don't know if any of my players are going to be actually watching this, but I was really looking forward to them finding out the connection to the the alien that they brought home with them. They went to a different plane of existence, found this like survivor in this plane of existence that had been kind of changed by it because they'd been living in the shadow plane. They'd been living in there for so long that they had also been changed. So I was really looking forward for them to finding out about the connection of that.
Any spoilers I can get for what the connections were, what it was up to?
So one of the people that they were trying to find who's building an experimental engine that had disappeared and this creating a new technology, it was actually going to be, spoiler alert, the was going to be their daughter
Okay.
who had been lost in one of his experiments that he was trying to and then
Oh,
trying to get them back.
that's really cool. Oh, it's a shame you didn't get to that twist.
But my I'm a fan of letting players make their own decisions and then dealing with what I think would be realistic consequences if it's something extraordinarily unwise.
Hmm.
So they left this denizen of the shadow plane alone in a hotel room.
Oh no.
They're just kind of like, yep, here you go. You can just stay here and we've got to take care of a couple of things. And then they left. And I had very clearly shown them that this was a dangerous character and someone who did not understand the realm that they were in. And they just left them alone. So they went off exploring on their own.
That um I questioned the decision there. Just slightly questioned their reasoning with that one.
It's always fun.
Oh no. What were you gonna have them do while they were gone?
Gone. What do you mean? What?
Oh, because they left the character alone. What were you gonna have the character do while they had left?
Oh, the character had gone on a little adventure and ended up getting kidnapped by the bad guys as well because they were also looking for them.
Mm. So,
So because they left them alone, they got into trouble.
so not necessarily causing unique new problems, but getting themselves into trouble and causing more hassle for the group.
Yes,
That's fun. I
but it's
like that form of storytelling a lot, where you just have open-ended consequences so the players feel like they're causing the story.
it's open-ended consequences, but you also want to try to tie it back to your adventure. So if you're
Hmm.
going off on a too big of a tangent, you need to have something to bring them back in. And they were really attached to this character, so when the character disappeared, it was like they were like,
No, I think that's a great way to handle creating some stakes.
I I don't know, maybe it's a byproduct of the ADHD, but I find it so much easier to GM because you have to think about multiple connections for things.
Oh, I
And
feel 100%.
I find that easier, at least thinking in big picture. Details can elude me, the minor details and things, but from a big picture web perspective, it's just easier for me to follow.
I 100% feel that way. I have ADHD as well, and I find it's easier to DM because then I can just be. It really is that when you're forced to focus, it becomes easier to focus.
Well, it plays to that because you're not just focusing on what you would do and what your character would do as a player, you're focusing on all of your players and their interactions with the world. So it kind of forces that uh, stimulation, that stress, you know. If it were not that you're actually stressed, but I function better in a stressful environment.
I absolutely feel the same way. Where just that little bit of pressure makes it so much easier to keep your mind engaged.
It's what's making me excited for a game that I'm now doing. I'm going to run a Pathfinder adventure with some friends. We've never played Pathfinder 2e. I've
Ooh.
never run a module before ever. So I'm going to run Crown of the Kobold King for some friends of mine here.
Oh, nice. I was about to recommend away from doing a module if you said any of the older ones, because when PF2 first launched, they hadn't gotten a handle on the balancing yet, and the earlier ones were just way too difficult.
Yeah, I'd heard that. I heard a lot about that.
Hmm. But I haven't heard much about Crown of the Cobalt King, but I hope it goes well because it Paizo has a tendency to write really good modules. So,
I keep hearing that, so I want to experience it a little bit. Um, I have to figure out just the flow of the module itself, and so I'm trying to get prepared for that. But we'll see how it goes, and then hopefully I can turn it into some content with some campaign diaries.
oh, that'd be fun. I mean, it, Pathfinder 2 is also just a really fun system. I think it'll be cool to get to be exposed to it because a lot you can really see a lot of the decision making from Starfinder found its way in. They really took a lot of the lessons they learned. I'm just going to say real quick, the cat person in the reference photo in the base of this race has a cool scarf. Is it? Would she wear a cool scarf?
For the most part, she would be, if she was wearing a scarf, it would be elegant. Most of her character is sort of based around elegance and class, I suppose,
Elegant
while
scarf.
also while also favoring um like the big firearms.
Okay. Would she be wearing armor? Because I think most Starfinder characters kind of have to by default, right?
Oh yeah, like you can't get away with not having armor. She would um she wasn't a character who was style above everything. She would definitely wear what would be appropriate. I think what we ended up what I ended up getting her into was some Defrix armor. So it was like leather armor and hide from animals and things that, because Defrix is a creature in Starfinder as well.
Hmm. Okay. I didn't remember that. But
Thick,
also,
thick skin.
I like big weapons, so I've only ever played a power armor character. I
The
am.
armor can get quite intricate and, like nanites and kind of things like that, but this was a low level game.
Hmm. So you weren't quite able to get the nano weave circuit of tiny robots coating your body yet.
No, no, not yet.
Unfortunate. Hopefully, I know my I've actually only played one Starfinder character because in both the games I played, I ended up revisiting the same character because he didn't get enough of a shot. I hope at some point you get a chance to revisit this character.
I would definitely like to. One of the opening scenes we did on our first game or maybe second game, she rode a grav lift into just a group of bad guys. It's like a forklift, but just on anti-grav.
So a hover forklift.
Yes, a hover forklift.
Did she have a hover forklift license? Was she hover forklift
No,
certified?
no, she was not hover forklift
That's
certified.
dangerous. You're not supposed to get behind.
And she tried making some shots while riding this
Oh,
uncontrollable grav forklift. So
no.
there's a bit of the recklessness.
I I love that as a scene so much because what we know of this character, elegant, likes big guns, committed, medic, willing to drive a forklift towards a group of enemies while firing.
Yes. She was very against. She was also a mystic priest, I guess you could call her, who served Pharasma, and that's probably one of my favorite Pathfinder,
Ooh,
Starfinder deities. So she
yes.
was also very anti undead,
Okay.
very anti undead, anti necromancer. So wouldn't have no necromantic spells.
For anybody who, oh my god, that means no healing spells in Starfinder. Didn't they make those necromancy? Or do you
Nope,
mean just
there's
raising the dead?
just raising dead.
Okay. So not the school of necromancy. That makes sense.
Yeah, not the school of necromancy.
But actual what we'd call necromancy. Much, much more logical. But yeah, Pharasma is such an interesting one because she's the goddess of fate and death, and the belief of a natural cycle of life and death. And something that's very fun if you go further in a campaign with your only healer being Pharasman is they don't like resurrection.
Yes. Well, I could see that being in Pathfinder. Resurrection is not necessarily
Ooh,
it's gray in
Pharasma's not
Starfinder.
against it.
It's gray. So there is a lifeline, and as long as you're not at the end of your line, resurrection is in some instances okay to Pharasma in Starfinder. Yeah,
Oh,
correction. Magic Nate's not against resing, against if it's not their time.
understand. So you can't recommend resurrect someone if Pharasma says it was their time. Friend of mine
Yes.
likes to recount Dread Necromancer begs holding filled with minions. No! Begs holding full of zombie minions? Oh no! I was looking at reference, so I didn't see those messages. Oh my god. That's so pragmatic but terrible. Oh my god. I love and hate it. Okay, so I had a mistake about Pharasma where I had always felt like if someone was running a cleric of Pharasma, it just meant that you dead, you dead.
Not not quite.
It just could mean that if the DM decides no, that was their time.
Exactly. It's one of those it's gray.
Hopefully, if a DM is going to say that, they consult the player and the player like has a say on if it was their time or not, but or there's a role. I could also see that being fair.
Yes, there is a bit of a death system in Starfinder as well,
Yeah.
but it's not a death save. I'd have to pull up a character sheet to just kind of
Is it
look at
similar
it.
to Pathfinder 1 where it's like a constitution save against 10 plus how much negative you're at? Or a
Uh
fort save?
it's yeah, I think it's a fortitude save. You oh it no, sorry, it's based off of your resolve points actually, because you have to
Oh,
spend
that
resolve
makes
points.
sense.
And when you run out of resolve points, you're dead.
Yeah,
If
that's
you
a,
haven't stabilized or come out of whatever effect you are.
That's something very interesting about Starfinder that I think is worth talking about is the balance between health, stamina, and resolve. Do you think you could kind of explain that for people? Because I think it's one of the most interesting mechanics.
So there's compartmentalized. So your health is your HP, that's the last thing to go. It's also the heart, one of the more difficult things to bring back. Your stamina is the first thing to be reduced when you're in combat. Call it a separate health pool, but it's also the easiest to bring back. So
Hmm.
long rests and short rests are a thing in Starfinder. When a short rest being about 10 minutes, a long rest being 8 hours. With a short rest, if you spend one of your resolve points, you can replenish your stamina. So after a fight, you can bring back your stamina pool by spending one of your resolve points. And most healing spells do not target stamina. They only target your HP.
So if you get lightly scuffed and it's just battering your stamina in a fight, the healer can't really affect that.
Correct.
Just towards the end of when we were playing, my favorite ability that I had just unlocked was very specific, and you having the three different health bars. Well, it's a little or not health bars, but two health bars and one health system. I think I'd call resolve if that's fair.
It's also used for some special abilities for the classes. So
Yeah,
call it a resource management. It's really
yeah.
tricky.
It's an endurance based resource management system, but the having two different health bars lets you have specific abilities that have a lot of flavor. My favorite one was called something like Laugh in the Face of Danger, where if you took actual health damage, you could laugh at it and it would give a morale boost to all of your allies. They're like, yeah, we're so tough, we can take this. And I just find that so flavorful and fun.
That's kind of a cool one.
I think there's such an interesting design space opened up by separating like being lightly battered or actually taking physical damage.
It's it was a good mechanic. I appreciated the way that it's worked. They didn't obviously implement that into Pathfinder, but I have enjoyed the way that it's used in Starfinder because it's a good gauge of being able to tell if someone's actually how badly beaten up someone is.
So it's not the same, and there's not as many mechanics to work with it, but there is actually an optional rule in the game mastery guide for using stamina instead in Pathfinder 2, for using the
Is there?
stamina system. Yeah.
Well, see, more I know. I'm still learning all the Pathfinder 2e stuff.
I'm no expert, but it is probably right now the system I'm most familiar with, just because I have run it more than anything else recently. Although I think probably the system I've run the most is D&D 3.5.
Yes. That is if probably my favorite D&D edition. I haven't played basically anything of 5th edition.
Fifth does a lot right, but I think just how little content they've added is the biggest issue for me.
I was, as an outside looking in, I was excited to see the return of Spelljammer. I wasn't excited about how they handled it or the lack of anything, substance that there was in Spelljammer, which honestly should be pretty easy to write a lot about.
Spelljammer is such a weird case at the moment with the whole D&D. I feel like in general, D&D is not doing enough with very cool things. And I think there's also just they're not investing enough in their writing team and giving them enough time. And there's a reason that all of the best reviewed 5e modules are retellings of classic D&D modules instead of the new content.
Yes.
And it's not
There
like
was
these,
also
yeah.
a significant amount of Magic the Gathering settings that have been released.
Mm-hmm. And of them, Ravnica is the only one that's a good D&D setting. I will fight for that stance. I think Ravnica is a great D&D setting. I don't want to play on Theros. I don't want to play in Harry Potter College. no matter how sexy Professor Liliana is.
I didn't when Ravnos came out from Magic the Gathering, I was still playing that and I didn't like the setting. I didn't like it.
You're not a fan of Ravnica, huh?
No, I was a fan of, oh crap, what's the one that what
Mirrodin?
was the one before Ravnica?
Mirrodin and Kamigawa.
No, it was not Mirrodin, is the desert one.
Oh, ooh, boy. That was was it just called Arabian Nights?
No, it wasn't Arabian Nights.
Oh
It
boy, what's the
was
desert one?
it's going to drive me nuts now. Let's
Well,
see if I can find
you've
it in
been
Google.
driven
What was it
nuts.
called?
While you're looking, I'll say that Ravnica is an interesting one because a lot of people find it divisive because it's seen as one of the times that Magic has most changed its aesthetics. Being the first one being the Satanic Panic caused them to lean away from dark metal. It feels very weird to me, the idea that I'm going to have to be sitting at a table playing against a David Tennant card.
Favorite Doctor?
I've never watched Doctor Who. Aesthetic wise, I like Scarfman.
Scarfman. Okay.
I need to get into it, but it's one of those things that's so intimidating to get into.
It's the remakes, they were really, really good. I wasn't into the originals. And at this point, maybe it's too late. Christopher Eccleston. Really?
Super Eccleston, Bronwyn in chat with an opinion.
I'm really torn between David Tennant or Matt Smith. I didn't like him at first, but he grew on me.
I've heard that from a lot of people, that he was one that people didn't really feel a lot of excitement for, but that over time he kind of grew on people.
Eccleston was an angry little man. Yes, he was.
Oh man. So what are some other great moments from this character from playing? Like, because honestly, if we had have mentioned the forklift earlier, I probably would have redrawn. No, I couldn't. I couldn't draw a grab forklift fast enough.
A grab forklift for that?
No, I think I don't have the time for that, unfortunately.
There were so many cool moments where we were infiltrating an office to gather some information. And one of her favorite spells to use was Mind Thrust. It basically a literal brain melter.
Oh, I love it.
It's a very powerful spell, especially for level 1s, but when you take it at the higher levels, it does some pretty significant damage. I remember some guard came into the office, the infiltration. She was just kind of standing by the door, and she just dropped him.
Just instantly mind thrust and brain melted, fall over.
Yep. It's like, what's going on in here? And then...
love that energy for her.
Oh, yeah, she was vicious.
So we have vicious, we have protective and hardworking medic, we have will drive a forklift despite not being forklift certified.
Yep. Almost, I guess you could say some of the inspiration also too came from, we'll say, Lara Croft from Tomb Raider.
That makes sense. I get from everything you said, I get a very chaotic good vibe.
She was definitely a chaotic. I think I actually had her as kind of a neutral character.
That makes sense. Both work. I guess that also puts her closer to Pharasma because Pharasma's true neutral.
She was definitely neutral, but sometimes she would go down to the pit fights in Absalom Station that were happening. At least in our game, they were, because we had a pit fighter who wanted to go make money. So she would step into the ring and provide medical services.
You know what? That's very kind. It's kind of an interesting way because it is supporting pit fights, but it's in a way where you're healing people.
Yeah, these people are going to beat each other up. I'm just going to make sure that they don't die.
Oh, speaking of Absalom Station, that actually reminds me. So something interesting about Starfinder setting is it's meant to be contiguous with the Pathfinder setting, but the world of Pathfinder has vanished. Golarion is gone, and in its place is just this space station. Do you have a theory that you like for what happened to Galarian?
I don't know. I haven't honestly tried to put too much out. I've Rovagug broke out. I am a fan of this theory.
Mm-hmm.
I am a fan of this theory. I've heard some that the planet is in a different. I think I've heard one that the planet is in a different phase or a different plane of existence somehow, uh, connected to Rovagug.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's probably the one that I would like best. Is something to do with Rovagug.
Yeah, because rovagug is this entity who I love as a threat in the Pathfinder setting because the idea is rovagug worshippers are right. One day he will get out, he will destroy the world because the only thing the gods could do, all working together, was seal him. Which, like, I think cultists who are right are scarier. It's why I think Asmodeus and rovagug have the scariest worshippers because they have a genuine point. But I do really like that idea. And then the question becomes like, wait, isn't it confirmed that is it confirmed? Am I remember this correctly that Galarian we know is still exists, like it didn't get destroyed?
I don't know. I don't think that that's been
Okay,
confirmed.
so it hasn't. For some reason, I thought that was confirmed, but also I'm not that familiar with the lore of Starfinder.
I haven't
Interesting.
been following Starfinder Society too closely,
Hmm.
which is the ongoing story of Starfinder, similar to Pathfinder Society.
Uh,
But that's where books like the Drift Crisis came out. That was tied to events of Starfinder Society.
okay. So, a quick question for you: what color cat?
What color was she? This is she was kind of or like cheetah spots almost, like she was orange with that orangey yellow color
Yeah, okay.
with the black.
So I'm going to keep this pretty simple. And then what I've been learning is I can get a lot more done if I just get this baseline done and then we start adding details painting over top. So it's going to look a little flat for a bit and then we're going to get some interesting aspects.
Does your program do layers?
Oh, it does.
Oh, it does. I don't see the layer screen, so I just know that
Hmm.
watching that it can be fun. I have 67 layers.
I try not to let it go that high, but it does happen. Not on stream. That would break my brain. I could not keep up the speed I need to. I think I would lose my mind. Oh God, I feel so mixed. It's one of those things with Galarian being missing that I both hope they never address it, and I kind of hope they do, and that it comes back at some point.
I don't know if they want to because there was a very clear separation with Pathfinder to Starfinder was the
Hmm.
gap. And that was the
Absolutely.
collective hallucination or the collective amnesia of the universe.
Hmm. I'm. I think almost certainly they won't, but it's just one of those things that gets like a devouring curiosity in the back of my head really wants to know. But it also lets them do whatever they want with Pathfinder lore to not have that connection exist at all, to not address it. That way, the worlds can be really limited in how much they need to concern each other.
And that's kind of what they've done with it. It was a clean break. Everybody has collective amnesia, and then let's move on from here. At least that was Paizo's way
Hmm.
to handle it. I get why they did it.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a very smart decision. I just need to know.
And they do give you some in the Drift Crisis book. They do talk a little bit about that, where you can decide what happened to the Drift Crisis. It could be any of these things. They never are really like it was this specific cause. So I think that if they're going to do anything with Galorion and what happened to the world, it will be kind of the same of it could have been these things. What do you want it to be?
That's probably the best way to do it. It's like we were talking about earlier with World of Darkness, where there's a huge amount of appeal in things not quite fitting together and only having just enough information.
Yeah, exactly.
It's actually something Pathfinder does really well too, because as you start to get into it, so you said you're not familiar with Pathfinder lore. If you look into the founding myths of humanity and the elves, there's a lot of correlation, and you're like, okay, so I see how these kind of interact. But then you look at the founding myths of other creatures like dragons and what they believe to be true, and there is 100% no way everybody's right. Like they are
I think that
entirely.
mimics reality, actually.
Mhm. And I just think there's something so much more interesting about non-negotiable mythologies.
I have really been impressed with all of the writing that's been coming out of Paizo, even early on in the early days of Starfinder. I wasn't involved with some of the Pathfinder, but again, even there, it was pretty
Mm-hmm.
it was pretty in depth. So I'm I've just been really really impressed with the quality that's coming out of Paizo, and I'm just honestly really surprised that it's not bigger. They're not bigger than they are right now.
I I think we're in an era where so White Wolf in the 90s was the big RPG. They actually took the title from D&D. And I think we are in an era where because D&D is popular with new players who are getting into it despite not being considering themselves hardcore nerds, it's just kind of impossible to fight the cultural prowess of being the name everyone associates with the hobby. Like I think there's just too many people who are like who wouldn't it wouldn't even occur to them to try another RPG
Yeah,
because they don't see it as a type of game, they see it as D&D.
and I hear that kind of argument as well when people talk about trying Starfinder. So oh,
Mhm.
it's just D&D in space, and sure you could condense it into that for simple explanation, but that doesn't really cover it.
Oh yeah, there's so much unique to the atmosphere that I think you miss when that's all you consider it as, because it really is such an interesting setting that they've put a lot of work and thought into. And like, what are my favorite example of them coming up with just unique things that aren't just a translation of a fantasy world is that they shelved orcs and elves. Elves, they're like, yeah, they finally got their wish to be xenophobic and they've kind of fucked off. And orcs, they're like, they're mostly used as slaves by the drow. They're not really that big of a presence. And those two decisions, I think, suggest so much confidence in the world they can make uniquely that they're willing to disconnect from orcs and elves entirely. And even Warhammer 40K didn't do that. Like, and it's the big science fantasy setting, and it clings to orcs and elves and is like, no, 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 they are still significant.
There is currently 124 playable species in
What?
Starfinder.
124?
There is 124 currently playable species in Starfinder. There is
Whoa.
4 monster manuals. They're called Alien Archives.
Yeah.
Um, there is multiple supplements and adventures with their own species that you could play within those. Um, the Starfinder Enhanced is going to introduce 12 more that we
Oh,
talked about earlier.
124. 34? 24?
124 right now.
124. Holy shit. I knew it was a lot, but that is far more than I thought it was.
Now that includes your elves and your orcs and your halflings and your um, gnomes and all the classic fantasy races.
What did we just do there? But still, oh my god. But so many
Did
of
you?
them would have to be so bizarre and strange to fill up 124.
There's with the Starfinder formula. Once you've kind of seen a few races, you get it.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's really easy. You don't. They've given some rules now on creating your own specific species, but it wasn't really that difficult. When
Mm-hmm.
you see what they've been going for and you see how they do it, it's like, okay, I could homebrew something that doesn't exist yet quite easily and not have it be utterly broken.
So, what are some of your favorites of this incredible catalog of playable races?
Of the playable races, the Pahtra are obviously my favorite, which is who you're drawing right now.
Yep. Cat people.
Um, cat people. The kobolds I do like. So there's kobolds in this universe.
What's a space kobold do? What are they like?
They are, how do you kind of describe them? They are tiny dragons that want to be dragons, but they were pulled from a different reality, so they don't quite jive with this one. So they have a disconnect with this reality, which is what's keeping them small. You can thank the witch warpers for that.
Okay,
But
so they would
their
be
ultimate,
dragons?
they want to be dragons. They believe that they come from dragon stock, and they are very pissed off that they are tiny. They are very bitter about it.
But okay, but would they be big if it weren't for the witch warpers?
In their own reality, they could be, but I don't, because of the shifting of pulling out of the multiverse. By the way, there's a multiverse in Starfinder.
Yeah, you just kind of threw that word out there, and I was like, what, there's a what?
Yeah, there's a multiverse in Starfinder now. So thanks to the witch warpers, because that's what they do. Their magical powers and abilities pull things from different realities, which means there is other realities that exist as canon in Starfinder.
Oh, and if kobolds come from another reality, then there is kind of the implication that, like, either none of them got off of Galarian, or the main reality of Starfinder is not the same Galarian reality as Pathfinder is.
That
Oh,
is a very real possibility, yes.
Oh, that opens possibilities.
So if I've just kind of blown your mind with that, the reality that you're playing in Starfinder might not be the same one as where Pathfinder comes from.
Mm-hmm. Oh, because, like, yeah, exactly. Because if, oh, my brain, yeah,
I
no,
broke it a little bit.
yeah, that's interesting. Okay, these are things I did not know.
And to compound that, each of those multiverses would have other planes of existence, like the Shadow Realm or the Fire Realm, or the Boneyard where Pharasma
Mm-hmm.
exists.
Okay.
So it really just goes big.
So earlier you mentioned that you like to include other planes. How do you kind of negotiate the existence and the meaning of another plane in a game that has other planets? Like, where's the line there? What makes another plane so much interesting? Do you more have to lean into the unique physics of another world for it to be as exciting in a world where they can already, in a setting where they can already visit many planets?
I think this probably comes from a lot of my werewolf inspirations and my werewolf, the apocalypse inspirations, like I was saying, because
Mm-hmm.
of the things like the Umbra. So I have always treated or thought of different planes of existences as kind of like a version of the Umbra. But if it's fire, then everything's fire and has that kind of skew to it. If it's shadow, everything has that skew to it. A realm that exists almost alongside this one, but not quite.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how I've always treated them or thought about them.
How does that affect how you tell a story in those planes, and how the role playing engagement works out?
I I don't know if I have a good answer for you on that one. I've only been
Fair.
able to experiment with it a little bit in my earlier games, but it's always been something that I've been drawn to story-wise.
Mm-hmm. Just there's a natural appeal to other worlds. So do you think that's made something like the Witch Warper that introduces a multiverse exceptionally interesting for you because it adds more versions of other worlds?
It does. And it just to kind of say it like this is kind of, well, making a new planet could just be so boring, but you could make the planets do whatever you want. It could be, a jungle world. It could be, for the sake of, all planets have different biomes on them.
Yeah.
But for the sake of science fiction and storytelling, it's easier to say this is the fire planet, this is the dead planet, this is the jungle planet. But in reality, they're more complex than that.
Well, I mean, they're still dominant ecosystems. Like, if you came to modern Earth, ecosystem wise, you'd be like, yeah, it's mostly a. Oh, I guess like you could
A
define it
water
as
planet.
dominantly a desert planet or a boreal forest planet because those are the ones that take up the most space.
From the landmass that exists, I think
Yeah,
most of the world water?
most of the world's water. So I think
You could call it a water planet.
you could. At what point do you think an alien stops calling it a water planet? Like, how much land mass do you have before they go? Okay, the interesting part is the land. Because
That's also a good question because 71% of the Earth's surface
yeah,
is covered in water.
because I feel like once you cross 80, it's a water planet for sure, right?
Oh yeah,
75 is the point where do you need at least 75% before I'd say this is a water planet? Because I don't think 50
75%
is
of
enough.
anything.
But I don't think 50 is enough because there's so much more interesting happening for a land-based species on land that I feel like you'd focus on that more. So I'm just, is 71% enough? I think so. I think they might be like, yeah, this is a water planet with significant land masses. I've never thought about that before, but I think you're right.
We're going deep and philosophical.
Yeah. When it comes to how to define a planet, I think it ends up being philosophical. I think every species would have a different answer to how they would define a planet. Like, I think most humans, 70% wouldn't be enough because we live on land and come from a planet with 70% land, or sorry, 30% land. So, like, that feels like enough land for us. But I think a species that evolved on a planet with only 20% of the surface being water, this would be a fucking water planet for sure.
If that's what we were looking for, we could call it the water planet because that's kind of what was it? Who said that? Merfolk. Where did that go?
Oh,
Yeah, Nate said it would be determined by the dominant species.
yeah. It
If
would
we were
depend on if their planet has water. If we were merfolk, Earth would be a water planet. True, we have a terrestrial bias. Yeah, so I think to the human perspective, you'd need at least 80% to be a water planet. I think to most aliens, we're a water planet, unless they come from unless they are a terrestrial species from a planet with a lot of water. Also, damn,
we have a terrestrial bias.
absolutely have a terrestrial bias. Fuck the
Don't throw
ocean.
your psychology at me. We're
What's the
talking
ocean?
science fantasy.
What's the ocean doing for me? You can tell she is in the social sciences there because they're looking out for the terrestrial bias that we have.
Ecology, baby.
Oh man,
I love it.
that's fantastic. Because what I was going to say is, I think there's points in Earth's history where you'd call it like a tundra world, or many periods in our history where you'd call it a jungle world, but maybe not. If you come from a planet with less water, you even during those times, you'd be like, yeah, it's an ocean planet that has jungles.
Yeah, I think you would more or less be calling it the same thing.
God.
I have appreciated speaking of planets and planet design with Paizo.
Mm-hmm.
They have given each planet that they've done detailed maps for has had diverse range of its biomes. You know, usually frozen at the top or depending on the axis of the planet,
Mm-hmm.
and then some range in the middle.
It's so they'll have like a dominant biome, but still have a level of diversity instead of this is the planet that's all jungle.
Pretty much.
I
Unless
do.
it's Akaton, in which case it's just a dust ball.
It's easier for a planet to be all one thing if the one thing is dead.
Well, yeah, Eox is also dead. Eox and Aposte.
Mm.
A lot of dead planets.
You know, it makes sense. Not every planet's going to survive all the struggles of being a planet.
Well, the Eoxians did it to themselves. They destroyed their own planet in the search for power.
Oh,
I
I hate
can't
when that
say
happens.
the Drow did the same thing.
Surprised by how many areas the fill tool missed. It's normally so reliable.
Shame, shame.
How could you betray me, Phil Tool?
So, how long have you been drawing?
Oh boy. As far as it's actually taking it seriously, like 6 years or so. I've been drawing for a lot longer, but I only started actually practicing and trying to improve about 6 years ago. So that's kind of the benchmark I'd put on it, because I feel like any time before that, I wasn't really learning very much.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a thing I did for fun, and then one day I was like, "Oh, I might be able to actually get good at this if I tried."
Takes some great amount of focus, which, while also doing an interview, is rather impressive.
Oh, well, it's the ADHD thing, right? The harder it is to focus, the more I can focus. That exact pressure element. I actually really love to have conversations when I draw. It's why I started the stream, because I love having a reason to multitask. Okay, we're gonna get some spots on this cat. Some spots and details. Sometimes I do a background also, but I think this is just gonna be a portrait
I think that's very fitting.
because it took too long to figure out the pose.
With the Pahtra Society, some of the at least the olden days, anyways, the markings were read by like a shaman or a spiritual leader in communities, and roles were then assigned to you based off of your markings.
Oh, okay. That reminded me of I don't know. Have you touched much 3.5?
Not in a very, very long time.
I doubt this is the inspiration because it's not the most popular book in 3.5. I just have a soft spot for it. It reminds me of the Darfalin from the Stormwrack book, which was the ocean book. They were orca people, and their patterns the shaman would use the patterns to determine a role.
Oh, okay.
Incredibly doubtful that that was at all an inspiration for Paizo, because it was not the biggest deal.
Well, you never know. I've always been impressed with the things that at least you can recognize from obvious inspiration.
Mm-hmm. So, is there like a list anywhere of like what the different patterns would mean, or is that just like a little tidbit they've included?
I think that's just a little tidbit that they've included. There's tons of things like that included with all over the place in Starfinder, not just on specific races, but also in just different places where they'll just be like, hey, this one place has a portal that we don't know where it goes to.
Oh God, that's cool.
What?
That's so cool.
And then they're like, yep, here's that information. You can do with that how you will. Like the elf planet, they have a forest of portals from the old elven gateways from Pathfinder.
That makes so much sense. That's rad.
But guess what? The elves don't control it anymore because after the gap ended, it was suddenly under the control of a green dragon who doesn't let anybody go through them unless they make friends with him. But not only does he protect it physically, he's also protected legally with an army of lawyers.
Oh my God, that's so fucking funny. That's really fucking funny.
So
Oh, I love that so much. That's so good.
and
Oh,
it's rumored one of those portals can take you back to Galorion, but if anybody knows, the dragon's not saying. Are
oh,
they Asmodean lawyers?
oh, that's the funniest idea to me. See you in so many courts. See, I can't get over that.
So he claims ownership of this forest of portals, uh, and legally, and it is protected by law.
So the elves can't do anything to get their portals back.
Nope.
Oh my God, that's such like cyberpunk shit. Which fair, like cyberpunk absolutely belongs at being inspiration for shit in science fantasy, because it's such similar themes and vibes. But God, I love the idea of a dragon who's like, "I have conquered your land." Well, we'll send heroes to. No, 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 no. Okay, okay, you misunderstand. I've conquered your land in a legal sense. If you send heroes, that is a violation against my sovereignty.
Exactly. Not only am am I protected by my own personal armies, but well, not that I need them because he's a freaking dragon, but I have my legal representation here, so I'll see you in court.
Something I find so interesting about Starfinder is the images they have of the one planet that's covered in dragons, where the dragons have like laser cannons mounted on their back and stuff. Because eventually dragons went, we didn't need to use weapons back when weapons meant swords, but we kind of got to get with the times here.
Ah, yes, Triaxis.
Hmm.
So Triaxis, you have dragons that live there. You also have the dragon kin that live there, and they had a civil war on the planet, and they kind of split the planet in half. So there's like half the planet is where you find most of the dragons. The other half is where you'll find the dragon kin. And then you have the Reforians, which are neither dragon nor dragon kin, but dragon enough that humans would be like, you're a dragon, but not dragon enough that dragons would be like, you're a dragon.
This feels like a commentary on South Africa somehow.
And they are somewhere in the middle. They were used as spies and informants in the civil wars on both sides.
That makes sense. That's that's interesting. So, are kobolds invited to Triaxis?
In See, the thing is, kobolds didn't exist for the first 2 or 3 years of Starfinder. So
Mm,
when they were released in the supplement Interstellar Species, technically they were in the species deck. Same with the Gnolls,
hmm.
which came out first, but you didn't get big write ups on those.
Right.
In Interstellar Species, they got a three-page write up on that, and that's where you learn about them. They're now trying to move to Triaxis. So to answer your question, yes.
Oh,
So
okay.
they've set up some small colonies there.
So the kobolds do want to live on Traxxas.
Yes.
Okay, as long as it's being addressed. If they weren't focusing on that, these little guys who want to be dragons on the dragon planet, a missed opportunity.
They do mention it. It is written into the pages there on the kobolds.
I love it. I love it so much. As we're reaching near the end here, is there like something I want to ask you? What things would you like to see be added to Starfinder? Because you've said that there's not really any complaints you have, but is there anything you'd like to see added? Any
The only
content? Yeah.
the only thing that I would like to see more of, and this is maybe they've done this in some adventure paths, because I know that one of the adventure paths explores one of the planes of fire, I think. I and this is just because I want to see more of it myself.
Hmm.
And if it doesn't exist, maybe maybe there's opportunity to write it myself, but I want to see more exploration of the different planes of existence, the more into the boneyards, more into um Axis and Abadar's vault, things like that. The more exploring of the gods and their
Okay.
their realms.
So because it's a setting that includes magic, you want to see that be a little bit more talked about, to see like what the mystical and magical side would look like.
Yes. There was a magical release for Starfinder focused as well. Like Tech Revolution was on giant battle mechs, and um, there was a magic supplement, Galactic Magic, which gave a lot of flavor text around the magic, the weave, and added buckets of spells, buckets of spells for every caster class,
Well, that's good.
and some balances and reworkings of some of those alternate casting methods that I kind of talked about a little bit. But it didn't quite scratch that itch that I was looking for, but I was happy with it.
Okay. So in the future, you would just like to see the god side of that be explored a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think that's reasonable. This gun makes way too much smoke, but I think it's kind of aesthetic.
Maybe it's magically or mystically enhanced.
It could be.
I think you asked the question, and I might have forgotten to answer, but the mystic is actually the space mage or
Yeah,
the space wizard.
I've kind of, it feels like they take a lot of the energy of every traditional spellcaster from D&D or Pathfinder and kind of try to cover all of the bases with one so they don't need to expand into a ton of magical classes. Like, there's a lot of cleric energy, a lot of druid energy, a lot of wizard energy to it. It's somewhere in between of just the generic aspect of mysticism.
Yes, it's kind of a one magic class to catch all for the traditional sense of magic.
Mm-hmm. So that they can focus on the weird sci-fi magic with the other magic classes.
Because this one is absolutely the most powerful. The mystic is absolutely the most powerful healer in Starfinder.
Mm-hmm. Which makes sense because they're the true spellcaster. They have true magic. And magic, pretty good at putting people back together in a way that medicine often struggles with, at least in most settings. I don't think I've seen a setting that makes healing better with technology than magic, but it's probably out there.
It must exist.
I was going to say Dragon Ball, but a sensu bean gets you in a second and a healing pod takes like a few hours, so no, not Dragon Ball. Mysticism for the win. Those healing pods are slow as fuck. Oh yeah, the Magical Mate favorite one ebook for Pathfinder, where you fight Baba Yaga and Rasputin.
Those were in Pathfinder?
Pathfinder 1 had a module where you met Anastasia, fought Rasputin and Baba Yaga. And also there was tanks, and you went to Russia.
Interesting.
They made choices in Pathfinder 1 towards the end. They were having a lot of fun. They really did make decisions, is how I'd put it. They also, I'm running a game in the place that would sort of set up Starfinder, where the entire bit of the setting is that a spacecraft landed a long time ago, and now it's Conan, because there's weird sci-fi shit and robots running around.
Yeah, Triaxis is not a planet that gets explored a lot.
I wish, I would love there to be more. If anything could suck me back into Starfinder, it would be having a party that would play it with me. If anything else could suck me back into Starfinder, it would be the Dragon Planet being explored more.
Dragon Planet and Battle Mechs.
God, appealing concepts. I dare you to honestly tell me, anyone in the audience, that battle mechs, Voltroning with your party, and space dragons aren't appealing. Any final thoughts to close out on?
Everyone should just play a little bit more Starfinder. It's a fantastic game, and it's rich in deep lore. You have to scratch a little bit. You have to scratch the surface of it a little bit, but once you start doing, it's huge. And this drawing is looking fantastic, by the way.
Well, thank you. We're going to be zooming in to clean it up in a bit. Well, thank you for being on, Nathaniel, who is not Nate or Nathan. I've had a lovely time talking to you, had a lovely time with chat, had a lovely time working on the drawing, and it turns out I knew a lot less about Starfinder than I thought I did, and I'm really excited to have found out about all the cool stuff they added. Anything you want to go ahead and plug?
Just the Maple Table on YouTube, at the Maple Table. Just plug the channel. Follow me on Twitter if you want to see some of my incoherent ramblings. Also at the Maple Table, and that's really it.
Alrighty. Hey, thank you so much for being on. Thank you, everybody. I've had a great time, and I hope everybody has a good one. And before you head out, just so you know, I usually spend about half an hour actually zooming in now and cleaning it up. If you want to hang out and chat, you can. If you have something you need to get to, you also can. This is just the more informal bit where the baseline is done, and I'm going to do touch-ups.
Perfect. I hear my children running around and screaming upstairs, so I'm probably gonna go have to save my wife from them.
Fair enough. I'll send you a full resolution picture of this when I'm done.
That would be awesome. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And if you ever want to be on again to just talk about anything, feel free to let me know. I'm going to make you a role called regular guest in the server. Basically, if I'm doing a casual hangout stream or looking for people to be on, I tag everyone with that role, and it just means that if you are interested, you're always welcome.
Oh, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Have a great day. This is a fun conversation. I had an awesome time.
Well, I'm looking forward to doing it again.
Awesome. Have fun saving your wife.
Yeah, it's. I don't know if you can hear it because of the floors and things. My microphone does get out some of the background noise, but
It's doing a good job. I haven't noticed at all. Thanks for chatting. This was really fun.
Thanks for having me on. It was great. Yes, into Voltron.
You got Voltron rules in Starfinder now?
Yes, yes.